The road to the electrification has evolved in unique ways across emerging markets, shaped by government policies, existing economic structures, and consumer affordability. In the next panel discussion, industry experts will brainstorm around designing and development of EV for the emerging markets. Over to you, Chanchal.
Welcome to ETAuto Electric Vehicle Conclave. This is Chanchal Pal Chauhan, Features Editor with ETAuto. I welcome all my panelists today for the invigorating session on designing and development of electric vehicles for the emerging markets. I have a well-laid panel today in terms of people across industry, across segments who have been developing this, who have been working with this right from the convention traditional and migrating to electric vehicles, which is probably the future of how mobility will be. I welcome Mr. Mahesh Babu, CEO of Mahindra Electric. Thank you so much, Mr. Babu, for joining us.
It's nice joining, Chacha.
Thank you, sir. We have Mr. Sohinder Gill, a veteran in electric vehicle industry. I have been talking to him for decades now. So thank you so much, Mr. Gill, for your time. He is Director General of SMEV as well as with Hero Electric. Thank you so much, Mr. Gill. Welcome to ETAuto Electric Vehicle Conclave.
Pleasure.
Okay. Mr. Rajinder Singh Sachdeva doesn't need any mention. He has been researching for years and decades. He's a veteran in auto industry. And Eicher, I believe, is one of the most sought after electric, as well as they are pouring into electric in a different way, right from bike to commercial vehicles. And they would be doing miracles which they have done in motorcycles and CVs. Thank you so much, Mr. Sachdeva, for your time.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. We have Girish, Senior Director and Country Head for Automotive, Infineon Technologies Limited. Girish, thank you so much for your time. I welcome you to ETAuto Electric Vehicle Conclave.
Thank you, Chanchal. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And we also have the Chief Technology Officer Hitachi ABB Power Grids India, Akilur Rahman. Mr. Rahman, thank you so much for your time. I welcome you for the ETAuto Electric Vehicle Conclave.
Thank you, Mr. Chanchal. Very glad to be here.
Thank you so much for your time. And I believe that for the next 1 hour, we will have a discussion where we will come out with some deliberation that will lead to generation of more concrete developments and steps in automotive. At least in terms of debate, we can bring some new insights and fresh points. I can start with Mr. Taneja for the reason that you are in a very conventional mode, and probably as a veteran in auto industry, you would be looking at how electric will change. Your company has been into manufacturing, and manufacturing is the most critical element of mobility. How do you see the development of electric vehicles happening in India? And as a conventional player, what are the challenges you foresee in that?
Chanchal, first of all, thank you very much for having me on this very eminent panel. I'd like to make 4 very quick observations on how I see electric mobility play out in India and what are the opportunities and what are the challenges, more particularly from a component manufacturer's perspective who has been engaged with IC engine components. The first thing is, if you rewind 3 years back, you will discover that they were mainly fence sitters. There was some amount of apprehension whether electric mobility will happen, at what rate it will happen, where it will begin, and which technology will actually eventually play out, more particularly in battery technology, etc. The biggest change which we are seeing in India is that now there are no fence sitters. Everybody believes electric mobility is here to stay. It's not a matter of if we will have electric vehicles, more particularly for 2-wheelers, 3-wheelers, and last mile vehicle delivery vehicles, but only a matter of when this will become mainstream. So this is one significant change which has taken place. The second change which has taken place, in my view, which is very challenging for all of us, is that there is a lot of media hype. There's a lot of conversation about electric mobility, which is not substantiated, backed by what is happening on the ground. And I say this with a sense of concern. People are talking of 30% electric mobility, electric vehicles on the road by 2030. Some people are talking of 100% migration. There are all kinds of statements coming. This is not good for the industry. As an example, investment which is required in powertrain components, investment which is required in new technologies for IC engines, which are going to remain a part of mobility solutions for a long time to come. This investment is now hesitant. There's a relook at, should I invest for capacity? Because I don't know what will happen. So this hype is something which we need to rethink about and moderate it in keeping with what's happening on the ground. There's a third aspect which I want to highlight. We are all talking about what's happening in United States and in Europe and how China is taking a lead over the rest of the world and so on and so forth. Well, India needs an India model for electric mobility. Our infrastructure, our equations on affordability, our two-wheeler market being the prime market for personal mobility. All these factors and many more require that we develop a model that is suited to Indian conditions, to Indian consumer. The fourth item is, in all this conversation about electric mobility, I feel that the issue of readiness of the supply chain, not only a supply chain for electric vehicle components like traction motors or controllers or inverters, but also electronic hardware, it needs to be factored in more realistically. So very briefly, I believe electric mobility is the right way forward for a country like India if we have to deal with CO2 emissions. It's a great opportunity for India, but we need an India-specific business model. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taneja. Mr. Mahesh Babu, just wanted to understand, because we get a perspective in terms of supply chain restrictions and capabilities of India, the challenges. But as the most experienced player, one of the largest OEMs, especially for electric segment, what do you see is happening? It's almost like 11, 12 years that Mahindra went into electric and bought Reva. The acquisition has been fairly successful. You have done wonders for the commercial vehicle segment. In the passenger vehicle segments, there are still limitations. How do you see that happening in terms of migration for a market like India?
See, like my colleagues have talked, I think India is a very unique market. I would now put 2 or 3 perspectives to look at auto industry, what's happening. I think auto industry is also getting disrupted like any other industry. While we say that auto industry is the most disrupted, I think every industry is getting disrupted in this decade, and it's going forward. It's going to have a very disruptive changes coming because of the consumer attention and behavior changes. Now we are talking about EV adoption in mobility. So when we look at EV adoption in mobility, I think we'll have to look at what's happening in energy. If you look at energy sector, they are going through the same disruption like solar, wind, everything like what auto industry is going through. India is in fact the head of Solar Alliance across the globe and leading this transition. Now I'm sure like auto industry, they are having the same question. Do I put a large thermal power plant or do I put it in solar or wind? And I'm sure India has very clearly thought about that we are going to be like 450 gigawatts of power in solar by 2030. The direction is very clear. The things are going towards it. Now the dichotomy and dilemma between the industry experts on investment lies across the same in auto industry. Auto industry is a little bit more because it has a significant contribution to the GDP as well as the employment. Now, how quickly we can skill this and change this is the most important. So let's come to auto industry now. Auto industry, India is a very multi-modal transport. It's very unique market when compared to West or East. We are not going to adapt electric mobility by adapting cars. It's going to be two-wheelers, three-wheelers, shared transport, cars, buses, metros, and also personal transport. So when we talk about electric, we are not going to talk about electrifying cars. We are going to talk about multimodal electrification. Two-wheelers and three-wheelers are almost 85% of the vehicles sold in the industry. And then we need to look at that very, very carefully. How do we do it? Now, most of the easiest way industry will talk about is policy, and then policymakers talk about industry, and then both of us talk about consumers. I always say that the three of us, the policymakers, which is the government, the industry, and the consumers, have to be working together for any new transition. And that's what is important. We have done something on fleet mobility in cars. We have done something on three-wheelers. My colleagues will talk about what they are doing in two-wheelers. But I think what Indian government have done on adoption on electric mobility in terms of policy, whether it is FAME, whether it is green plate registration, fiscal and non-fiscal, followed by state governments, which have done tremendous work on both demand as well as on investment to technology, have clearly given an open page for industry to come and invest. So they have done their part for industry to do. I think what industry is also doing, you can hear in last many years, India is setting up the largest two-wheeler plant. We are setting up a plant in Cotton. Many industries are coming and announcing the investment towards electric mobility. The third biggest part which we have not addressed is the education and the new ecosystem with customers, which I believe is the responsibility of both industry and the government. Because there are a lot of myths of customers on usage pattern, charging, anxiety of range. I think we need to work in a larger part, particularly in India, because we have multimodal transport. The West and the East have a very simple way of telling range for cars, but we have usage pattern of two-wheelers, which doesn't run more than 20-30 kilometers a day in a city, three-wheelers, which doesn't run more than 100-120 kilometers. And both of them don't need a very large charging infrastructure, and it is very simple. So we should not overrate charging infrastructure and I would say scare these customers who are in two and three-wheelers and then confuse them about it. So we'll have to be segmenting education. Two and three-wheelers doesn't need big, large infrastructure. It can be charged at home. It can be charged at simple 15 amps plug point across the country. And hence, how do we make this ecosystem work? If we are looking at fleet, then we'll have to look at how to make that ecosystem work with captive charging, because most of the fleets have their captive usage, predicted route pattern. So we need to work on how to help them out to use captive charging and adapt a new ecosystem to make them successful. Buses have a very similar predicted route. It has depots. Charging can be made easy, or whatever method can be made easy, and it can be very well controlled. The only thing which is let loose is the personal cars, which needs large charging infrastructure. You need large investment and you need lot of education, and there are plenty of players talking about it. And most of the time we get lost on electric mobility when we talk about cars. That needs tremendous efforts by government, industry, and consumers. So if India is about 85% two and three-wheelers, and cars is just a few percentage about, so where do we spend money and time and energy? That's what, as a country, we need to think about. And that's what I would leave it to the panel. Where do we focus? Two, three-wheelers, buses, and fleet cars, or do we look at more personal cars? We can do that on both sides, but India being limited on everything, manpower, limited on skill, limited on capital allotment, limited on road infrastructure, we need to see what is our priority. I just said if we just convert in two and three-wheelers, a 30% to 50% conversion by 2030, we will just save 6 million barrels a day of oil import. So there is a huge impact on pollution, and energy. So I would leave that by saying the three legs of government, policy making, industry, and the consumers are in a different cycle in two and three wheelers, whereas in a different cycle in personal cars. But all of them need to get converted, no doubt about it. And the question is, who has to do what in this, or the one which we need to reflect.
Mr. Sachdeva, I want to bring you in the sense that Babu raised a very pertinent point in terms who will do what. Wanted to understand from a OE perspective in terms that you are into a very critical element, which is buses. And I don't want to say buses now, there are other players who are also coming in a big way, which could also be foreign brands. So where do you see Indian companies, OEs, whether they would be allocating the right resources in terms of bringing in competition for electric vehicle segment? We'll have buses. You would all, as a company, you would also be looking at other segments. And Mr. Babu is perfectly right in terms that beyond cars, there are other modes, other segments which dominate. The volumes are much higher and which are much more prudent in terms of electric vehicle migration. You feel that the companies will embrace this challenge in terms of allocating resources and lead to development of electric vehicles, as Mr. Taneja said, basically the model for India?
Where we stand today, if I look at that, there's one side, there's a consumer, second side, there's a OEMs are there like us, and third is the government. The three stakeholder main, I see that thing. I see consumers are very excited. You see the last 15 days of excitement, Tesla news which is coming in the newspaper, and you see the excitement. Consumers are very excited. They are going to get the zero emission vehicle and electric vehicle, and that's one part. Second side, government, initially 3 years back, some statement was made 2030 onward, there'll be zero ICE vehicles and only EVs will be there. And after that, they also taper down. And now they say that let the industry decide what they want to do. But primarily, I see that since I come from commercial vehicle, if I deeply look at that, what we have done so far, I see that operating economy and viability is a very, very big enabler for the commercial vehicle, unlike in the car segment, which Mahesh was talking about. There, of course, it's a lifestyle product and nobody's bothered about the daily earning and EMI you need to pay. But if we look at the buses and the trucks, probably the viability, the single most enabler. And if I see, today we talk about EVs, even under FAME 2 also only 1,000 buses are running across the country today, even after 2 years of FAME 2. And FAME 1 also around 435 buses are running today. But if you look at the tri-rickshaw in country, today 1 million tri-rickshaws are running in the country. Why? It's only the viability aspect. That you get the Chinese kit, 125,000 is the cost, and then you buy the electricity or the free electricity, and you see in Delhi, almost 500,000 EV tri-rickshaws are running. Look at in UP, some of the city, Punjab, you look at that thing, it has just proliferated. What is the question? People are not bothered on the cost of ownership. The initial cost and viability is a major enabler for that thing. And if I look at buses, if I look at China also the highest number of enabler, highest number of vehicle which has come to the EV side is the buses. They had around 15% of the buses which has converted to EV, and now subsidies have been tapered down. The things are going a different direction. But looking in India, if I say that thing, if we have to successful, initial cost of acquisition, which is today about 2.5 to 3 times that the diesel powered vehicle. And if you have to match the acquisition cost, that's the number one enabler. How we do that thing, I think we can discuss it further, what government need to do, what we would need to do. And second is the running cost. If we look at the total cost of ownership for the buses today, we see that in total cost of ownership also, over 7 years or so, you are just matching the diesel vehicle operating cost. Even in the electric vehicle, over 7 years, total cost of ownership is just matching. That means you are not getting any advantage. And that's the reason that people are not going for that thing. Now, government also, they did try to do, initially they said that the subsidy will be given for the buses. And we found that FAME 1, it was the CapEx based subsidy was there. And FAME 2, it is now the OPEX based. And subsidy also has been reduced from earlier 10 million rupees to now 4.5 million rupees in FAME 2. So unless some stakeholder like government support the initial acquisition cost, give the assistance in terms of subsidy, probably buses will not be successful. Today also, we have got a lot of competition when there is tendering is happening. We have got the product, we have developed the product, products are available. But what we see is that you are not able to make the model viable model because the overall total cost of ownership level or acquisition level or the running level, we find that there are still huge disadvantages are there. And today one more challenge has come in. Earlier, the comparison was the, like particularly like NCR, like CNG is also proliferating across the country. Today, Mr. Dhanandar Pradhan is talking about 10,000 CNG station will be deployed over next 5 years. That means comparison is not with the diesel anymore in the NCR. People are comparing with CNG, where the operating cost is 30% lower than diesel. So CNG is also one of the contender for the EV, and somewhere the government agency today also talk about that thing, that instead of going from the diesel to the EV directly, one should have gone from EV to CNG and then to the EV. Probably that would have a more acceptable solution for the Indian industry. So
I'll just bring in Mr. Gill in the sense that the cost is a very major issue and challenge. Two-wheelers basically have an advantage of cost, which is more adaptable in India. But Mr. Gill, we have seen that the transition has not happened. Probably 10 years back, we were selling more two-wheelers. How's the industry going from low speed to high speed, from lead acid to maybe lithium ion and other formats? How do you see the challenge in terms of designing, developing two-wheelers and more Indianization in terms of government incentive coming in FAME 2 and localization, PLI is there? How do you see this happening? Do we see some real growth on the ground level in the next 2 to 5 years?
Thanks. My fellow panelists have really explicitly put the nuances of electric mobility where we are. I'll touch upon two-wheelers. See, in the last 2 years, there are clear 3 price segments and 3 performance segments are emerging. One is on the low speed, which is 25 kilometers per hour, no registration, no license, and they are mostly 50,000 or below that. The next price segment is 60 to 90, which is a city speed type of a medium speed, 40, 45 kilometers per hour, 50 kilometers per hour. And they are similarly priced to the Activas and so-called other vehicles of Jupiter and Pleasure scooters. And the third segment, which is interestingly coming up, is 1 lakh plus segment, which Eicher was dominating. Bajaj has entered, TVS has entered. Now Bhavesh, Ola is entering in a big way in that segment also. So perhaps from that point of view, the past was a little different from what is going to happen in the future, because past was all lead, all mostly low speed. Even now, 85% is low speed. But quickly, the landscape is changing towards offering a complete variety and a solution to the customer. Now it's a customer's pick. Whether he wants to go only 10 kilometers a day, so speed doesn't matter for him. He is more concerned about non-licensed vehicles, or he wants a high performance vehicle. So that is where the one part has happened. Well, is this? The second part is that during the COVID year, we were all fearful whether electric mobility will be able to stand the harsh realities of the down cycle of economy and everything. But most of the partners, most of our members, they have come out winners. And our volumes are going to be equal to little higher than the previous year. Like current year volume may touch upon the same thing of 150,000 of last year. The next thing is that it's a very small volume. It is still going to take a lot of time to come up to any percentage worth the name, which is like we are at less than 1%. How can we make it 10%? How can we make it 15% is the real game here, because electric mobility surely will happen in two-wheelers. The question is when. Will it happen in 5 years or 10 years? When we say 30% of it. To accelerate that, there are few steps that have to happen besides what has happened already. And few things that have brought in confidence is, like Ashok was saying, is a great media hype to the tune of even distrust. But yes, it has really helped. When media is talking, people are listening about, yes, electric mobility makes sense. But my personal opinion is, at least for the next few years, the market is going to develop like Sachdeva is saying on the affordability segment, because TCO comes in after 3 to 4 years of usage. So the consumer who is buying, he has a suspicion about the TCO part of it. Although theoretically he makes calculation and people are trying to explain that if you buy it at 40% higher than the petrol bike, you will more than that get an advantage in next 3 years. But it's yet to be seen, because there are not many on the road. there is no visibility, and there is no 3 to 4 years of experience of a lithium battery product on the road successfully performing. Therefore, the affordability part of it, or the value for money part of it, the sticker price part of it, is governing the market today. And I'm seeing a very big emergence of a affordable or a value for money, not the low speed, a sort of a mid-speed segment coming up, which is sort of best of both worlds, or neither here nor there, but it is sufficient enough, city speed type of vehicles. So if we look at that segment today, which sufficiently complies with the standards, good quality, good reliability from many brands, and also backed up by government, what is going to happen in next 2 or 3 years is surely, I think this segment is the one which is going to create the inflection point about the electric mobility. Then there will be always vehicles of 1,50,000, which will give a lot of imagery, and there'll be vehicle of low speed, which will create a lot of solutions on the low end for the rural areas or semi-urban areas. Now, that is one aspect of it. When you talked about PLI, my only fear is that PLI, yes, it is a good scheme. It has been announced, but is supply chain ready to use it? Is PLI the only incentive they were waiting for to start investing into manufacturing? No. There are other reasons people are not investing into batteries or powertrains or electronics, because the confidence of business, like Mahesh was saying, or Ashokji was saying, was still not there from supply chain point of view. So PLI has come. It may add a dose towards the decision making, but it may not turn the table towards investment, except when there are other heavy doses, like in a battery cell. There are other things that are happening along with PLI also. Now here we have to see one thing that is being talked in the government is a little fearful. And if it happens, it may be a U-turn. The government perhaps is also juggling with the theory of we have too many incentives. On one side, there's a PLI. Second side is like GST. And third side is direct customer incentives. So perhaps there is some thought going on that, okay, if we have a great PLI scheme, why should we give front incentives to the customers? So that is where perhaps it will be again too premature, as FAME 2 also in some respects was too premature to put in many qualification criteria. And that's why FAME 2 has not been a success in two-wheelers case also. So similarly, I would only expect the policymakers to think that today the single objective, like everybody's saying, is policymakers, industry, and consumer. We create that 5 million, 10 million volume somehow on the road, with lots of things like customer direct incentives, with awareness, with the sort of financing, and also mandating businesses to convert to electric in two-wheelers. All these 4 or 5 things are done together. In 3 years' time, we may have 5 to 10 millions. Then these things can come in and pitch in. Then you can have import embargoes. You can have great schemes at the back end. Okay. Last point is Delhi is an example where things are happening very right. Delhi is sort of, if you see, they change very fast. Like 2 months back, there was something else. Last week, they announced a new change to the policy, and they're in the tune with what is required by the customer or required for electric mobility. So I think Delhi will take a lead and others have to follow. The states are also doing a good job, but particularly for two-wheelers and three-wheelers, we have to see what Delhi is doing. They are doing everything right here. They are saying commercial two-wheelers to be stopped registering from 1st of May. So 5,500 commercial two-wheelers are getting registered in IC engines. They will become electric from 1st of May. That's a good volume, 60,000 in a year. Delhi is saying a lot of other things about three-wheelers also. So I hope we have to learn lessons. We have to get together our act. And I'm very optimistic from company point of view and SME point of view, that at least in some segments, we are almost there on the verge of exponential growth.
Girish, I just wanted to understand from you, because we are transgressing into the topic of market. We have to stick in terms of design and development, and you are the most relevant guy in terms of design development with the technological backup. How do you see India's capability in terms of developing product which could be embraced by customers? And do you see any kind of expedition in terms of leapfrogging India, where our technological prowess in terms of manufacturing, because India is world's largest two-wheeler market. Bus, we have fairly a very large volume. One point at time, we were the world's largest. So there's so many factors that go in favor. Do technology development, design and development of products and the future generation, which are more customer centric and customers are willing to spend and embrace them, is that possible in today's scenario?
Definitely, Chanchal, it is. If you look at today, right, in the market, what is kind of India's base has always been is more focused on the software. If you look at all the big companies setting up a lot of offshore development centers, everybody more focused on the software portion, but the hardware kind of got left behind. A lot of focus on mechanical components. We supply globally in terms of turning parts or stamp parts, forged parts, but where we kind of didn't really catch the first wave is on development of hardware that is actually the basis for a lot of these components or a lot of these systems. And also, if you look at the overall ecosystem in India, we always, for hardware, we always looking, make versus buy, make versus import. Most of the people we go to, our customers, we look at is they're looking at, what is the landed cost versus what is the cost to develop. And every time we take a system that's actually not developed for India, right? It's developed for some other country in the world, and we try to bring that system into India. It's not indigenized, as Taneja ji said. And what we do is we either decontent it, or we kind of make a few modifications and see that that is actually what we actually need for the Indian market, which is not happening. And definitely there have been a few players. Mahesh, Mahindra Electric is definitely one of them who've got into actual core development from the basics. They're actually developing all the components, all the subsystems in-house, which get for them to better understand what the real market is, what do the end customers want, and what are all the nuances and the learnings that we actually do as we go through this process. So in terms of what you also look at, right, is do we actually have the system knowledge to integrate these various components? We have motor manufacturers. We've been manufacturing BLDC motors, PMSM motors for a long time. That's not a concern. We've also started to do assemblies. We also assemble phones. So we also assemble a lot of the electronics. But what is happening is, how do we bring all of these things together? There's very, very few players or people with the knowledge who can actually bring them together. For example, you have courses, look at like Mahesh talked about in the academia. You have very few universities or very few vocational training institutes that actually teach people how to bring this whole system together. It's not just about building a vehicle and putting them on the road, right? It's also to determine how do you maintain them, how do you repair them, how do you fix them, and improve the longevity of any of these designs that are actually in the market. And these are things I think we have some way to go. We can't always depend on the government for all of this. It's actually the industry that also has to contribute. As a company, we've been working with the Skill Development Council of helping develop, the ecosystem. And I can give you an example. It's not maybe directly relevant to EV, but how as an organization, we looked at semiconductor manufacturing, for example, in Malaysia. This happened about 2 decades ago, where as a company, we actually had about 600 people come over with us to Europe, work in our plants, understand the nuances to help slowly build up the ecosystem. They all went back. All of them did not work for Infineon going back, but then this helped slowly develop the ecosystem. And once people, it's not just about building a plant and running it, right? Just like you build a vehicle and said, how do you actually figure out, how do you improve it day in and day out? And how do you basically make it more efficient? And one of the challenges you also face is, if we have a breakdown, what do you do? I've seen with some of these inverters that we talked about, like used in the e-rickshaws, what do? You just go out to the aftermarket, bring a new one, replace it. That will not work in a car, or that will not work in a vehicle where you're actually paying a lot of money. So very importantly is that ecosystem development, the system knowledge that is really necessary. And a lot of the companies in India are now slowly transitioning over from mechanical based systems to incorporating electronics into it, because they realize that if they don't bring electronics into their products, it's going to be very hard for them to survive. For example, one simple product that we have been seeing, not directly EV, but for example, carburetor. The carburetor for BS4 had to go to an EFI system for BS6, but you had an intermediary solutions, which a few OEMs have developed, an e-carburetor. basically putting electronics to control the flap of your mechanical carburetor. And this was a solution which is more relative to India for the segment, like we talked about, the 100cc, which is, you know, the very price sensitive segment. And as Sohinder Gilji also mentioned, two-wheelers, three-wheelers are the segments which have the mass. And this is where we see, you know, more indigenized solutions. We have the capabilities, you know, when Indians are, you know, controlling, like even US President Biden just said, you know, Indians are the ones just controlling NASA. And if we have so many of them able to do it there, definitely we have the know-how, we have the brain power to do it. It's just bringing the whole thing together. And which I think is, rather than, you know, focusing the dependency on the government, all of us players can actually come together and actually help build this ecosystem. And definitely the dream of 30% of all vehicles by 2030 can definitely be achieved, but it basically needs a more cohesive effort of all of us.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Rahman, all the efforts in terms of product development might not lead to the conclusive benefits if the charging infrastructure, if the backup, if the energy solutions are not there. As an automotive journalist, I have been driving those electric vehicles, and there is a major challenge in terms of intracity, intercity electric vehicle movement, though at a very nascent stage. But gradually small things are happening. Framing is turning in. I want to understand in terms of the energy solutions, what are the challenges in terms of development, and what benefits it will lead once we have an acceptable level of charging infrastructure?
Okay, thank you, Chanchal. Very good question. Before I start getting into the energy sector in this, the energy aspect of it, I would say that this is one domain where you see diverse set of stakeholders. They have to be engaged. They have to be bringing in their technologies. We have to integrate them. Now, starting from electric grid operator, providing the energy, a charging infrastructure operator, then we have the transport operator, then we have the vehicle OEMs, powertrains, and battery provider. The battery technology is also changing rapidly. Then, of course, we have on the other end the consumers in terms of passengers and drivers. I think if we look at the technologies in each of these segments, we have, especially towards the electric mobility. What's important is how we can bring them together, integrate them together, and providing a user experience at the same time also be cost effective. I think a good business model. So now I come to the energy sector, what Mr. Babu also rightly started with. So the energy sector, especially the electric energy sector. So we as the Hitachi ABB Power Grids, we have been, this area since last more than, 135 years in electric energy, and also providing the different equipment, controller, automation, SCADA. What we see in the energy sector here is that pre-pandemic, you can say that, we have been talking about fourth industrial revolution. As part of that, renewable, increasing the use of renewable in the grid. And second is also the distributed energy resources. How do we integrate them? And looking on the consumption side, we also saw this, the electric mobility as one which is also going to impact the energy system, the grid. Because this is one area which is sort of bringing in more dynamic nature of the load consumption. So here, as energy provider, and also what we see the technology is that the grid is able to provide the energy required for electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Because here it's not about just you hook it up to the grid, it will start working. The grid has to sustain these changes. And these changes are, when I talk about the time scale, it's in milliseconds. So you can't say that, okay, if I have thousands of vehicle or chargers coming up, and then suddenly, in a day, you have surge of vehicles getting hooked up to the charging station, and then somebody can predict and do it. So it's all dynamic. In millisecond, it happens. The grid has to sustain. Now, otherwise, it will go into a blackout kind of mode. So that's the very automation, very real-time control we have to bring in. At the same time, we are talking about carbon neutral future, having all the renewables in place, and also the remote areas. We are talking about not only cities, but towns, villages where we may have also microgrids, for example. Microgrids where you have the renewables integrated, you have the storage also there, battery storage. And also we are talking about now the hydrogen, green hydrogen. So that also is going to come up in the energy ecosystem. So bringing in all these things together and at the same time providing the charging infrastructure. When we talk about charging infrastructure as Hitachi ABB, we also have technologies, not only the normal charging, but also fast charging, ultra fast charging and flash charging. So example of flash charging is like when you have bus and it is stopping in the bus stop. So it can get charged, top up charge for 20 seconds. And it can get charged for 10 minutes, 20 minutes in a terminal. Then it can go back to the depot and then of course get charged during the night or maybe during the period when it is not running. The idea here is that what we do is we integrate all these different technologies to ensure that the bus is available more on the road, carrying more passengers than going back to the depot to get charged, or carrying tons of battery in the bus itself where you are reducing the capacity of the bus. I think this is something what we do, that we simulate the condition, both the mobility point of view as well as the electric grid point of view, that how we combine the depot charging, the terminal charging, the flash charging, 20-second charging, and ensure that the efficiency, the cost effectiveness of the bus carrying more passenger is there. And here another aspect is also the energy cost. We are talking about the renewable energy, although the cost economics can be justifiable here. But also the business model. I think Mr. Taneja also talked about how the capex and also the budget cost, how it is going to be viable. So here what we are seeing also that the business model will change from capex to opex for everybody. That we don't have to put upfront the capex to really make the charging infrastructure available. So maybe it's on OPEX side, somebody will invest and then it is sort of operationalized in terms of cost, and it can be linked to the energy cost and also the cost of running the transport. So here, if you see combining all these technologies together and also having a system, real-time system where you can have the forecasting based on the AI ML algorithms, you can have also the real-time control of the grid. You can also have the user experience available where they know where to go for the charging, where it is available, whether it's a fast charging, ultra fast charging, or maybe it's a depot kind of normal charging. So the entire ecosystem, as I said, it's a diverse kind of technologies there, and I think each one of us, we have the technology. I mean, talking about our segment, we have the electric grid control, real-time control, bringing in the renewable energy, controlling them in real time, and also having the fast charger, flash chargers there, and microgrids technology. And also on the OEM side, I think there are technologies where they are having the electric vehicles, whether it's a bus or a car or two-wheeler, three-wheeler. And what we need is actually at the same time, policy maker, the government is also willing to really invest in this, motivate all the stakeholders. What we need is a collaboration among all the stakeholders to integrate all these technologies and make it viable with the business model. Okay, that's what it's.
Thank you so much. Mr. Babu, need to understand that there are very pertinent points being raised, but at the end, in a nutshell, it remains that what kind of products will come that will lead to a business model where electric segment grows. As one of the oldest players in terms of allocating resources, now you have more focus, you have bring in separate verticals. As automotive journalists, we might have missed in terms of having the glamorous part of passenger vehicles not doing so great, but it could also be other segments which are doing well. Three-wheelers have done well, two-wheelers are coming up. How do you see electric vehicle going ahead? Will India lead to a new kind of a model which maybe as an emerging market, other places have not seen? How do you see your experience, your synergies of such a long, as a successful OEM going ahead for a market like India?
Ashok, that's a very profound question, and I would like to share Mahindra's experience in this. Yes. I entirely agree with my colleagues. The customer is going to buy something which is valuable, and he or she is not going to buy at mass adoption just because it's environmental friendly. So it's not going to happen that if we think that just because of environment, people are going to come and buy electric vehicle, it's not going to be the reality. It has to make value. Now, how the value will come in different segments again. They were talking about proof of the pudding is seeing people, seeing the vehicle on the road. Let's say there are a lot of myths that the lithium ion batteries, will it go like what's happening in your mobile phone 1 or 2 years later, will it go? I can only share that our 2013 E2Os, which are still 100 vehicles made in the first month, is still running without a full battery change. And some of the vehicles have covered, I would say more than 150 vehicles have covered 150,000 kilometers. In fact, two vehicles have covered 250,000 kilometers. And about 10, 15 vehicles have covered 200,000 kilometers with lithium ion, and they are now 8 years old and their life is still there. Customers are using it and there is no resale of it. People love it. And people who have got converted to electric never go back to IC engines. So that's the good part of the life of the battery. The second is we have done models around four-wheeler fleet mobility and three-wheeler and proved that it is economically viable. Today, if you look at Trio, I met many customers who are saying they are earning between 3 to 6,000 rupees extra due to lower operating cost. And many women drivers have embraced electric mobility because it's now three-wheeler is drive by wire. It's not no more a male dominated. It's fatigue-free driving. So it changed the complete socio-economic change. For example, I met a woman who are working in garment industry, moved and bought Trio, now driving Trio. She is independent. She is charging at home. She's saying she's earning 3 to 5,000 a month extra, which helps us to educate our second child. I think any technology in India needs to transform the lives of the people in that society. I think this makes a profound business case where customers are earning. It makes a social impact, and India needs such kind of stories as well, apart from supercars, which is good to drive. So three-wheeler, I believe, is a very clear example of a business case in the current scenario with the current FAME subsidy, with the current battery prices. Going forward, it's going to only improve. Now, who takes that improved money, whether government wants to take it in tax or industry wants to take it in profit or pass on to customers, I think that will be decided based on how the market goes and how the competition goes and so on and so forth. I think that is a fair deal. The second one is fleet. While the pandemic came and actually taken away the fleet operations, whether it is employee transport or shared mobility, it's not going to go away. India, if we have to provide mobility for 1 billion people, it's not going to be based on individual cars or even individual two-wheelers. It's not going to happen. People have to get into shared mobility at any cost. Just before pandemic, Morgan Stanley was predicting about 50% of all the rides by 2040 taken by Indians has to be shared. So as industry, our challenge is how to become sustainable and how to become economically viable. So as my colleague Sachdeva said, it's not going to happen economic viability of electric buses very soon. It's going to be taking a very long time. Now, do we as a country take only economic viability and put it in the system? It's not going to happen because some segment will have economic viability like three-wheelers, like four-wheeler fleets. Buses are not going to go to economic viability at all because there I would say national interest should take over the economic viability and government has to intervene and say, gentlemen, you know what? It's going to create a huge impact on mobility in India. And hence we are going to take this as a movement, not based on economics. So we'll have to look at how to develop this because if you are not doing it, somebody is going to do it. You are seeing what's happening, a mass transition to mobility of buses in China. Europe has now started already this transition. UK is getting into a lot of things. So you cannot be left behind in auto industry once again. I would say that in last 100 years, Indian auto industry has been, particularly in cars and buses, have been lagging the West, bringing in technologies which has been deployed there. I think EV is an opportunity for that to reset. And if we do it properly as a government, as an industry, as a consumer and academia, I think there is a chance to do. And hence, I would say some segments are economically important. Some segment like two-wheeler are 80% of the sale of the country, and hence they need attention. It may not be due to economic viability, but maybe due to intervention by policy and regulation, plus economic, plus consumer awareness and many more. So I would say each segment will have a different approach, and government should be flexible and industry should be flexible to adapt these segments rather than just saying only economic.
Mr. Gill, even if the industry remains flexible, do we need price parity with ICE engines in terms of EVs getting at par and grabbing consumer attention? What improvements or improvisation in terms of development of these future vehicles could be that they become an attractive proposition to the huge volume of ICE engines?
It's very difficult at present to create a price parity, mainly because the price of batteries constitutes 40 to 60% of the cost of the vehicle. The only thing that some people are attempting, like Ola is attempting, is a great volume being sort of projected and promised to the vendor base. So that's a business risk some people are taking. And vendors are also perhaps taking that business risk, that whether volumes will bring down the scale and scale will create a demand. But if it doesn't create a demand, then everything falls flat. But on today's scale or today's volume, it is impossible to have a price parity between IC vehicles. And that's why this intervention of government policies by either subsidies or mandating or regulations is a must to, even if not price parity, at least create an equation where electric mobility takes off in a bigger way. Mahesh said it very clearly, visibility and proof of the pudding. 6-7 years back, 100 ETOs are still running, and those customers are really the sales guys now telling 10 others that, okay, electric vehicle, I have saved so much, I have enjoyed so much. Instead of 100, if there were maybe 1 lakh cars that time, we would have seen inflection points in car already coming there. Same as a two-wheeler here. We have hardly 600,000 two-wheelers across the road for the last 10 years. They have been lost somewhere. It's not seen. So unless that first mass comes through that cycle of 3 to 4 years and then creates this, that all the suspicion gone out of the window, the TCO really sets in. It's a real great thing for a smooth ride, no heat, no vibrations, and also economy. Then the things would happen. So I'm saying price parity is not so important, but at present it is very important. After 3 years, it may not be important because TCO will be a deciding factor in addition to the price parity. But in order to do so, some of the manufacturers, what they are doing, like Hero, we are doing is, we are bringing down the performance parameters slightly lower to try and create a price parity. Now it's a customer choice. You want to buy a performance vehicle at 200% of the IC engine, or you want to buy a 90% cost price of a IC engine, but have a little less performance. And we are believing even that is taking a good demand. It is getting good acceptance in the customer's mind.
Mr. Taneja, if volume and scale will determine how the electric vehicle embracement happens with the customers, as a player in terms that you have a huge experience of manufacturing scale and supply chain, what do you see electric vehicles needs to do in terms of product development that will lead to a better kind of acceptance and the challenges you feel that the segment might have?
The first thing I want in this regard is consumers don't decide what to buy based on what is best for the environment. Consumers buy based on where they see value for money. Unfortunately, the reality is that even governments don't always decide or able to decide what is best for the environment. If governments were able to decide what is best for the environment, you would have had a scrappage policy in place 10 years back. Every major auto producing country in the world has had a scrappage policy with benefits of improved emissions and improved safety. But we have political compulsions, being a diverse country, due to which it is not possible for governments also to take the best solution. Keeping the reality of India in mind, what is important is to take a technology agnostic approach in this matter. We don't know. I mean, we have all kinds of consumers in this country. We have a government which is talking of alternative fuels, more CNG stations, use of ethanol and alternative fuels. It is the same government which is speaking of battery electric vehicles. Ultimately, if you want to see scale and development of electric mobility in the country, which is primarily driven by a need to reduce the carbon footprint, improve the environment, you have to take a calibrated approach. The calibrated approach has to be technology agnostic. It has to be driven by CAFE norms. Incentives and disincentives have to be based on what is your fleet average. To try and drive a particular technology is not going to be possible. I come to the second point. Take buses, for example. It is eminently the best way for mass transportation alongside metros. Nobody denies this. But look at the state of the bus industry in India. Largest number of buses are owned and operated by the government. And almost all transport undertakings are bankrupt. What do you expect? That they will pay twice the value of a bus in order to protect the environment? They don't have money to maintain their existing buses. I think we should take a realistic view, not an idealistic view. What is affordable? At what rate we can go through a change process and calibrate it according to the dynamics of our society. I come to a third issue. A very valid point was made, I think, by Mahesh, Babu, and perhaps by some others. It's about shared mobility, which Mahesh Babu spoke about. You know, shared mobility is a great idea. Does it meet our cultural ethos? How many of us are willing to send our daughters or granddaughters on a shared two-wheeler? Are we comfortable with that? Are we willing to send our daughters, wives, or anybody, even in shared mobility in a car? Our cultural ethos is not designed like that. Shared mobility must happen. It will happen. It will happen for a segment of population. We need diverse solutions for diverse set of people. So let's not, it should be horses for the courses. What is ideally suited for a segment may not be ideally suited for another, which is where I started by saying, you cannot take a European solution or a Chinese solution and bring it into India. China has mandated only electric buses in several cities. Can we mandate this? Can we afford it? We cannot. We need an India-specific model. My last observation. New technologies require new business models. And I completely agree with my colleagues who said, CapEx has to be replaced with OpEx. If you had battery swapping technology available, business model available, the initial cost of ownership will become much lower. You bring in affordability immediately. The number of consumers who come in to accept electric mobility will multiply, will grow exponentially. You will have the ketchup effect. You know how ketchup comes out of a bottle? It's very slow in the beginning, and then when it comes, it really comes. It flows. But for that, you need an OpEx model. So initial cost of ownership is lower than an IC engine vehicle. And battery swapping is available easily at every petrol station, for example. So we need to take a more holistic view of electric mobility and not just one. It is not technology alone. It is affordability. It is acceptance in our cultural ethos. It is about at what stage of development is our infrastructure? What is consumer confidence in the new technology? All these factors need to be taken into account.
Mr. Sachdeva, I want to bring you in terms that as we are going ahead with the scrappage and possibly the government might give some kind of incentive in terms of for modernized fleet, do you feel that buses, at least to make a beginning, might be an incentive in terms of replacement of ICE buses with electric vehicles? And then as an OEM, are you ready in terms of having more price equation that would be beneficial for the STUs and other stakeholders?
Thanks, Chanchal, for question. And here I want to say that VCV is committed to the EV technology, and we have a support from Volvo side also. And Volvo seriously feel that by 2030, 35% of the transportation will convert to EV, at least in Europe. They can't talk too much about India, but definitely they have got a roadmap. And EV, when they talk about it, it could be the battery operated or it could be fuel cell operated. Both the thing put together, it will be 35%. Coming to your answer to your question is that we have a product available today and we have developed those products. And with scrappage policy, definitely some more incentive will come. Government has done good thing. GST is only 5% on the buses. The two level of activity, if we do that thing, one thing at our level, OEM level, and second at the government level, I want to see that. At our level, we have to decide that, as everybody is saying, that initial cost of acquisition. How do we reduce that? For a school bus, it has to run 50 kilometers a day. And that too, it's a standing after that, and a lot of time is available also for charging is available. Why not? I wish I should go for a very, very minimal battery size and reduce the cost. Today, 60% of the cost of the buses is the battery cost. For my, when I say talk about 200 kilometer range. But if I look at a school bus segment where it's a run for 50 kilometer, I can reduce the battery capacity to 1/4, and where the total cost of acquisition cost can be only maybe 1.5 to 1.6 times than that of the IC engine driven bus. So there we are committed to find out some niche segment where the battery capacity required is lower. Second is that opportunity charging time is available, where per 15 to 20 minutes fast charging time is available, fast charging is available. There also I can reduce the cost. And third is the lightweighting. And fourth is that working on the control system, battery management system and control system, so that I can reduce the parasitic losses of the auxiliary items like AC, like steering pump, like brakes, compressor, that consume almost 20% of the total capacity, charge capacity. How I can reduce that parasitic losses? And they run only when it is required. That means I have a very strong battery management system, which monitors that when and everything need to work. Compressor can get cut off when the pressure reaches for the brake. Steering pump can cut off when the vehicle is running on the straight ahead position. Few things, if we can do that thing, so that I can overall I can reduce the cost, definitely it can become a viable, and we are committed toward that. That's on the OEM side. And then if I look at government side, I think government Niti Aayog has a very, very good plan that 40 gigawatt power they want to bring in India, and reducing the import duty on the lithium mine, which is coming from Bolivia, Australia, Argentina, or China. If you can reduce the duty structure for that, and then set up the plant for the basic cell manufacturing in India. In these two areas, if the government can do some fiscal incentive they can provide and reduce the overall cost. Today, we are at $200 per kilowatt hour is the battery cost today, which can come down to maybe $120 in 2025. And with that, definitely we can come very close to the viability model. And definitely we are committed, and scrappage policy will be the icing on the cake. So that's what I see a very, very positive thing. And I'm saying that EV is going to stay. And as faster we operate, faster government takes a step, definitely there's a way forward there which can be viable.
Girish, is there a possibility in terms of price reduction coming from the suppliers, the subsystem developers? Is there an initiative coming in terms for an emerging market like India, where better cost realizations can be worked to allow OEMs to have more cost competitive products?
Definitely, Chanchal. Especially the electronics industry is a volume-based model. So higher the volumes, lower would be the price. So usually, even if you look at the volumes that we are quoting today, or anyone is buying today, is based on segmented models. Up to 500K is a specific price. Beyond that, and also year on year with the technology improving, the prices are coming down. And like Sachdeva sir said, the battery cost from $200 per kilowatt, $200 kilowatt hour to 120. You're seeing this. And definitely Mahesh can also talk about what they were actually buying the first battery cells when they started ETAuto in 2013, and what they're buying today has significantly dropped, and it has become a lot more competitive. Same thing with the electronics, as well as when we learn newer ways of modeling these systems for India, you can remove a lot of redundancies that are actually built into these systems. These were built for different applications. For example, we talked about Mr. Gill talking about the system where you have high performance bike. You're trying to use that ECU, remove a few components and use it for a bike for 100cc. You really don't get the cost competitiveness there because you're not developing multiple systems. You're trying to use one and kind of bring it down to a different system. But once you have volumes, definitely the prices are going to drop. And yes, as you said, the end consumer is not just going to pay more. Everybody is green in their mind, but not want to spend the green in their pockets. So that's definitely something that we have to keep in mind. But yeah, the costs are going to drop. And yes, are you going to see a price parity 1-to-1 between an electric vehicle and an IC engine? No. But then the benefits that you would get from it, and also certain segments that would actually be more willing or adaptable to this segment is where you would see it go. Yes, volumes go up, prices will drop and be more competitive.
Mr. Rahman, I need your quick response in terms that we have seen massive electrification happening in railways, but it's more dedicated corridors and it's almost distance segment. There has been a fairly successful model, but at least all the panelists are saying that buses are one segment where it's more likelihood that electrification and possibility the charging might happen. As a player in terms of energy solutions, can you give a take in terms that how do you see that happening in India, especially in a market where there are certain limitations of products and it has not taken in a big way till now, but possibly if we have that energy range anxiety solved, because as an automotive journalist, I've had many a times. How do you see the solutions coming for emerging markets?
Before I get into that topic, there was a very interesting point which Mr. Sachdeva raised. I think maybe can I take that?
Yeah, please.
So Mr. Sachdeva talked about, let's say the school bus, which is running only for 50 kilometers a day. And can we justify the electric vehicle, concept in that? So I'll bring in another concept here, which we normally take in energy, that we have a term called prosumers. It's about users who are not only consuming, they are also providing, they are also producing energy. Okay, so this is the term we have come up with. So think about this school bus, which is electric bus, and it gets charged in the depot and or the terminal, and then it runs and comes back and it gets again charged, and then the depot, let's say, have a solar PV. Okay, so it basically takes the solar power and then gets charged. So the same school bus can be used as, because it has battery, it is storing the energy. So the same school bus can be also used as a microgrid. That it is storing the energy, it is also providing the energy to the grid or maybe to the depot or to the school or wherever it is. So it is feeding back the energy. So it is not only used as a vehicle to carry passenger, but also in the idle time, it is used as a storage and provides energy. So that's a very good example of prosumer. I think if you look at the economics of this, definitely you can justify how a school bus, even if it runs for 50 kilometers, it can be having this business model of prosumer providing energy, storing and providing energy to the system. And in this, actually, it needs a very sophisticated control of the energy, how you store, how you provide the energy to the grid. At the same time, it is not sort of disrupting your bus electronics and also control. We have technology, we have the microgrid controller, which actually can manage this in a real-time situation. So that's what I just wanted to say. I mean, there were a lot of concepts like this. Even the cars also can be used the same way. Okay. Like we say, the solar rooftop in the houses, they are the prosumers. They can consume electricity when they are on vacation. They can, the solar rooftop can supply the energy to the neighborhood or maybe to the grid. Same way. So then coming back to your topic of railway electrification, I think that's a good example of how it has gone accelerated, scalable. Now almost we are reaching to the stage of full electrification. And also here we are also talking about battery operated trains, for example, wherever you don't have the tracks in the railway lines with the electrification, you can also have the battery operated trains, which can be charged in the depot, terminal, or maybe in the flash mode. And what I see is here, I mean, coming back to many of the speakers talked about, how it is going to be economically viable. I think there are two elements here. One is the economics. The other one is also the strategy. Strategy about carbon neutral. Of course, here the common denominator is that we have to provide the user experience, that the user is not deprived of charging. I mean, they should not run out of charge when they need it. So whether it's a swappable battery or whether it's a flash charging, whether it is charging at home or maybe charging in the parking or coffee shop, I think that, and then we have a different type of technologies available, whether it's a swappable technology, flash charging, ultra fast. So these are there in the technologies there to integrate them. But also, I think it's about the carbon neutral future. Many of the countries, they are announcing that by 2030, 2050, they will be carbon neutral.
Yeah.
And I'll come back to the point even Mr. Mahesh Babu raised, that in the industry, the fleet, during the pandemic, they were not running. I think the fleet, because of this carbon neutral announcement by many of the industries also, obviously it will also address their value chain, their, the fleet which is carrying their employees, they also have to be electrified. I think two elements, economics as well as strategy, both will definitely drive this electric mobility further. And then I would say that technologies are there.
Mr. Babu, wanted to understand, sir, do you feel that India would be a mode market that will have halo products for high performance that will eventually lead to aspiration, or it will be more mass market adoption in terms of product that is going into bigger segments, two-wheelers, three-wheelers, cargo, light commercial vehicles, that will lead to ultimate the acceptance of electric vehicle in India?
I think, Chachal, the market will be there for both. But the question is, what is more important as a country? And what is critical for the country's economic, what I would say, economic benefits, import benefits, and things like that. I think the most important part as a country we need to look at is how do we electrify or come out of the import of oil and be self-reliant in areas which are economically viable. That is three-wheelers, fleets, goods movement, last mile, first mile, mid-mile, where it makes economic sense. These are automatically adaptable, and hence how do we enhance them by interventions and make them more faster adoption. The second two sectors which we talked about is two-wheelers and the mass buses. They need specific intervention by government, support, economic, non-economic, and things like that. The reality is, I think I hear a lot of questions. Is it hydrogen? Is it CNG against EV? I think I want to make it very clear there is nothing against EV. Nothing can stand against EV when it comes to efficiency, and it can't stand by itself. There's every scientist and every technology know. The question is how other methods like EV, CNG, ethanol, methanol, alternate fuels, they are going to take over diesel and gasoline. That is the reality. The fight or the ultimate goal is to reduce oil import, reduce pollution as much as possible, and use local energy, which is generated here. It is electricity, CNG is abundantly available, and that looks like that. So we will have to look at country, industry, and individuals, that sequence. If you look at that, then it's very clear we'll have to look at mass adoption in India in three-wheelers, two-wheelers, and buses, and fleet transport. It is most welcome if somebody who is, instead of buying a supercar in gasoline, buying a supercar in electric. Mahindra is building a 1 million euro electric car, Battista, in Europe, 100 numbers, and they are very selectively sold. So we participate. We are in the Formula E, learning a lot of things in racing. So it's not that something is flamboyant, is only racing and supercar. I think it's important to transform the lives of the people of the country like three-wheelers. We need to play on all the three as a country to make sure that that we learn. Many of them think that the journey is over. I would say it's in the beginning of the beginning. The reality is going to be very sustainable way of mobility. Everybody agrees. Nobody knows how it is. One of the serious contender today is EV. You like it, you don't like it. That's the reality. So that's going to bite you as soon as possible. That's all I can say.
Thank you so much, Mr. Babu. On that note, I would like to finish this. We have already run out of time, rather overstressed ourselves. My extreme apologies. I could not accommodate any more questions. But I thank all the panelists, Mr. Babu, Mr. Gill, Mr. Sachdeva, Mr. Ashok Taneja, Girish, and Mr. Rahman. Thank you so much for your time. I just hope that electric vehicles play the role and they envisage the mobility that they are required and the cargo for a country like India. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time, and wish you a great year ahead. Hope the new fiscal brings a new end of freshness to end this pandemic, and we have better and more safer lives. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, panelists, for your inputs. With this, we have reached to the end of the day one of the ETAuto EV Conclave 2021. On behalf of the ETAuto team, I would like to thank all the speakers for the valuable time and the knowledge they have shared with our audience. My special thanks to our participants for joining this event. Finally, my heartfelt thanks to all the partners for helping us in converting this event into a big success. Powered by partners Varroc Excellence and Tata Power, in association with partner Tata Communications, state partner MIDC, associate partners Hexagon, Infineon, Altair, NBC, and ANSYS, supporting partners Hitachi ABB, Padmini VNA, and Enritsu, event tech partner VConfex, and this is an initiative by ETAuto.com. Thank you, and see you all tomorrow for the day 2 of the ETAuto EV Conclave 2021. Stay safe.